My granddaughter chose a concert over my daughter's funeral. I told her that her mother had died. She laughed and said, "Well, I already had the ticket, didn't I?" A few weeks later, she tried to use her credit card and found out I had shut it all down. My name is Gerald. I'm 76 years old, and not long ago, I buried my only daughter. Death isn't a stranger to me. I've buried friends, distant relatives, even my wife, years ago. But burying a child, that's something else entirely. It throws the natural order out of place. We grow up assuming we'll go first. That time will take us before it takes them. And when life decides otherwise, what's left behind is a kind of emptiness words can't describe. Emily was 49, strong-willed, sharp-tongued, steady-eyed, but with a heart that bled for the people she loved. She raised her daughter alone after the father disappeared without a trace, vanished when the baby could barely say mommy. And still, Emily never complained. She just kept going, worked 2 jobs, studied at night, ran the house, raised her child, and still found time to ask how I was doing. I helped where I could, with rent, groceries, anything. But the credit for raising that girl with dignity, that was all Emily. On the day of the funeral, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. It wasn't hunger. It was something deeper, a tension that had been building since the moment I got the call. The chapel was simple but lovingly arranged. White flowers, straight pews, the heavy silence of people who haven't yet figured out how to grieve. Friends from church, co-workers, neighbors, they all came. And in the middle of all that pain, I waited for one thing, for my granddaughter to walk in. She was all I had left of Emily. I saw that girl come into the world, held her in my arms, took her to school, changed her diapers. For years, I was more than a grandfather. I was her anchor, her support, her constant. And now, standing in front of my daughter's coffin, I needed her there. I needed to see that she felt this too, that I wasn't the only one grieving, that she still understood what her mother meant. Minutes passed slowly. The pastor arrived. The casket was closed. People offered hugs and whispered condolences. But she never came. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just traffic. Maybe something had come up. But as the time dragged on, a quiet certainty began to settle in my chest. This wasn't a delay. This was a choice. And no matter how much it hurt, deep down, I already knew what it meant. I stepped up to speak without having prepared a single word. I just let memory guide me. I talked about who Emily was, a woman who never played the victim, a mother who never backed down. I talked about how she laughed, even on her hardest days, about how she loved her daughter, even when that love wasn't returned. I spoke because it needed to be said, because my granddaughter's absence was screaming louder than anything else in that room. After the service, one of Emily's co-workers approached me, her voice low and hesitant. She said it might not be her place, but I had the right to know. My granddaughter had told everyone she wasn't coming to the funeral, that she had tickets to a show, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And when she said it, she smiled. Everything around me just went quiet. The world lost its color. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. It was like something inside me disconnected. Because in that moment, I realized I hadn't just lost my daughter. I'd lost the last person I had any real hope in Deanna. Not because of death, but because of a decision. And that kind of loss breaks something in a man that doesn't grow back. I went home alone. My tie felt like it was strangling me. The silence in the house was just as heavy as the silence in the chapel. I sat at the kitchen table with my breakfast untouched in front of me, staring at my hands like they might hold some kind of answer. But the only thing that kept echoing in my head, over and over, was the same question. Where did we lose this girl? Because the woman who chose a concert over her own mother's funeral wasn't the granddaughter I helped raise. She was someone else. And maybe that someone else had been there a lot longer than I realized. I wanted to believe that woman had made a mistake. Maybe she misheard something. Maybe it was gossip. My granddaughter at a concert while her mother was being buried? No matter how distant she had become, no matter how cold she'd grown in recent years, that just didn't seem possible. But the impossible doesn't last long when the truth starts fitting together like a puzzle you wish you never opened. I went home that day and sat on the porch for hours in the same rocking chair where Emily used to have coffee on Saturday mornings. I looked up at the sky, hoping for answers. But the sky was too clear, too quiet. It felt like the world had kept spinning while I got stuck in a day that refused to end. Losing my daughter was already unbearable, but my granddaughter's absence, her silence, that's what made me realize I might be more alone than I thought. The next day, the messages started coming in. People from church, co-workers of Emily, a few distant relatives who still had my number. Some sent condolences, others expressed shock. But one message stayed with me. It was from one of my granddaughter's college friends. She said that when someone asked if she was going to the funeral, my granddaughter laughed and said, "Of course not. I already bought tickets for Kyle Blake's concert. I'm not missing that for anything." I read that line so many times I memorized it. Not missing that for anything. Like her mother's funeral was just some minor inconvenience. I didn't feel anger. Not exactly sadness either. It was a different kind of grief. Because that's when I understood maybe the granddaughter I loved so much didn't exist anymore. Maybe for a long time, I'd been seeing what I wanted to see, not what was really there. She wasn't always like that. As a little girl, she used to say she'd take care of her mom one day, that she'd buy a house just for the two of them, that she'd never let anyone hurt her. I remember those words clearly. And back then, they were genuine. But time passed. New friends came along. Empty idols. An obsession with likes and followers. The sweet girl faded, and someone colder, flashier, more distant took her place. I thought it was just a phase. Teen rebellion. But it grew, and it became who she was. In her final years, Emily told me she hardly spoke to her daughter anymore. They barely saw each other. The girl would leave without warning, return whenever she wanted, ignore texts and notes. Emily kept trying. She cooked dinner, left messages, asked for conversations. But the only thing she got in return was cold silence. And even so, my daughter never stopped loving her. The last thing Emily said to me about her was, "She'll understand one day, Dad. I have faith." And now, every time I remember that, it tears me apart because maybe Emily died believing in a redemption that never came. There was no phone call, no message, no sign of mourning. 3 days after the funeral, I found a photo on social media. My granddaughter smiling, drink in hand, arm in the air, with the caption, "Unforgettable night." What show? What energy? And that's when I knew, for her, life hadn't paused. My daughter had died, and her daughter went dancing. As if nothing had happened. As if her mother had never existed. We love hoping we'll be loved back. We teach expecting to see that love reflected in actions. We sacrifice, believing that someday that love will come back. But love is no guarantee of return. Sometimes we plant in dry soil and refuse to admit nothing's going to grow. That's the part that hurts the most. Knowing it wasn't lack of love, it was lack of response. That night, I got up from the porch and went upstairs. The pillow still smelled like Emily's lotion, the one she'd used since she was young. I lay down, closed my eyes, and let the silence tell me what words never could. Something broke inside me. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just understood. A door had closed, and I wouldn't be the man holding everything together anymore. I was done. Some disappointments don't make noise. They just arrive, and silence what used to scream. Her absence at the funeral wasn't just disrespect. It was a decision. And when someone chooses to walk away from what's sacred, you don't chase after them. You let them go. Not out of revenge, but out of survival. The decision I began to form that night wasn't about punishment. It was about boundaries. For the first time, I was going to let life, not my money, teach her a lesson. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what she needed. After the sharpest part of the grief passed, what remained were the memories. Not the happiest ones, at least not always, but the real ones. The ones soaked in effort, sweat, sleepless nights, and small daily miracles. Emily was only 25 when she found herself alone with a baby in her arms. The child's father vanished without explanation, without a goodbye, without even leaving a single envelope of money behind. He disappeared like someone trying to erase their own name. And still, Emily didn't cry in front of me. She closed her eyes, squared her shoulders, and said, "I've got this." And she did. She worked as a store clerk during the day, took college classes at night, and still came home to care for her daughter with a level of dedication that bordered on superhuman. I watched it all. She bathed her, told stories, made up silly voices just to make the little girl laugh. There was no luxury, no nanny, no support system, just her grit and every now and then me. I helped with rent, groceries, medicine. But Emily never waited for help. She made things happen, even when she was falling apart inside. I remember watching her late at night, sitting at the kitchen table, rolling brigadeiros to sell at college. Her eyes red from lack of sleep, her hands steady. She used to say she didn't want her daughter to feel like she lacked anything. And the truth is, she never did. The girl grew up clean, cared for, well-fed. Her toys were simple, her clothes were modest, but what she had most was presence. Emily never missed a parent-teacher meeting, a rehearsal, a Mother's Day presentation. She made sure to be there, even when her body begged for rest. There were seasons where Emily cried behind the bathroom door. I knew. I heard the muffled sobs through the towel. But she always came out with her face washed, forcing a small smile, trying to hide the pain. She never liked appearing weak. Maybe it was the past talking. Or maybe, deep down, she knew that if she broke, no one else would be there to hold it all together. And even when her daughter got sick, it was Emily who stayed up all night, taking care of her, still showing up to work the next morning like nothing had happened. There was a rough stretch when the girl had severe asthma attacks. Emily almost lost her job because of how often she missed work. I offered to take care of the girl to ease the burden, but she refused, gently, yet firmly. Dad, she only has me. I've never forgotten those words. Because deep down, Emily always knew she was alone in that mission and still managed to make it look like it was her choice. She never blamed anyone, never asked for much, just kept doing the best she could with what little she had. My granddaughter's teenage years marked the beginning of the distance. She changed fast, fell in with people who only cared about image. She became aggressive, impatient, even with her mother's affection. Emily saw it happening and still tried. Bought trendy clothes, turned a blind eye to some behaviors, even made a social media account just to understand what her daughter was posting. But nothing was enough. The girl slipped through her fingers, becoming more distant, more ungrateful by the day. I warned Emily, more than once, told her to set boundaries, to hold her daughter accountable. But she always answered with that soft, stubborn love. She just needs to know there's a place to come back to. And maybe that unconditional love, that relentless hope, is what made things worse. By trying to be everything all the time, Emily may have robbed her daughter of the chance to feel the weight of her own decisions. And I, out of love for both of them, kept financially supporting a structure that was already collapsing. I'll never forget one particular day. I arrived at their house and saw my granddaughter yelling at Emily, all because of a declined credit card. She shouted that she was tired of living like a poor person, that she deserved more, that her mother was ruining her life. Emily just stood there silent. After her daughter stormed off, she looked at me and quietly said, "She's just upset." Teenagers say things. But that wasn't teenage rebellion anymore. That was ego, entitlement, cruelty without awareness. Even then, Emily didn't give up. She kept paying for college, despite the low grades. Kept funding trips, clothes, parties. With my help, of course. Because deep down, I also wanted to believe there was still hope. That maybe, just maybe, all that love hadn't been in vain. But when I saw my granddaughter choose a concert over her mother's funeral, that was the answer I'd been avoiding for years. And now, every time I think of everything Emily did for that girl, every sleepless night, every dress she didn't buy so she could pay for courses, every note she left on the bed hoping for connection, it breaks me to know that in the end, she left this world with her hope intact and disappointment knocking on the door right behind it. They say no one changes overnight. But sometimes the change is so quiet, so gradual, that you only realize it when it's already turned into distance. At first, it was just a colder look, a snappy reply. Small things. The girl who used to run into her mother's arms, who hugged me every time she arrived, started acting different. She'd sit at the table without speaking, leave early, come back late. And when she did, she reeked of heavy perfume, her makeup smudged, her expression far too grown for her age. Emily tried to pretend she didn't see it, said it was just a phase. Teenagers, right? But I'd seen this movie before with other kids, friends' children, and I knew how it ended. Then came the disappearances. First a full day gone, then an entire weekend. No warning, no texts. Emily would call me in a panic, and I try to calm her down. But she always blamed herself. Maybe I'm being too strict. Maybe I'm messing this up. That was the worst part. She thought loving too much had been her mistake. My granddaughter started hanging out with a group of girls who live for social media. Her phone became an extension of her hand. Nothing else mattered, only the image. Every moment was a chance to post, to chase likes, to stage a life that wasn't real. And somewhere along the way, school stopped being a priority. Her grades tanked. She missed classes constantly. Emily got called into meetings with the principal. I went with her a few times. But no matter how many warnings she got, the girl didn't care. There was always a rehearsed excuse, a charming smile, a well-told lie. We tried talking to her, calmly, firmly, with love. I told her she was slipping, that she needed to wake up, that she was throwing away her future. She laughed, just laughed, called me old-fashioned, said the world didn't work that way anymore, that nobody needed a diploma to succeed, that her mother was bitter because she never enjoyed her youth. Those words cut deeper than she'll ever know. And when I looked at Emily in that moment, I saw a weariness in her eyes I'd never seen before. Still, Emily didn't give up. She kept paying for college, even with no progress. Gave her an allowance, bought expensive clothes, funded empty dreams. With my help, of course. Because deep down, I also wanted to believe it was just a passing storm. That all it took was time, patience, a good talk. But time passed, and nothing changed. Actually, something did. She got worse. Colder. More arrogant. More cruel. One time, Emily put together a small birthday surprise. She made a cake, decorated the living room, bought a simple but thoughtful gift. My granddaughter walked in, looked around, and said, "Wow, this is so tacky, Mom." No thank you. No smile. Just went upstairs and never came back down. Emily cried that day. Really cried. For the first time in years, she couldn't hide it. And it broke me because that wasn't just ingratitude. That was contempt. And when contempt comes from your own child, no amount of love can heal it. I started wondering where we went wrong. Did we give too much? Did we protect her so much that she never learned to value anything? Maybe. Maybe we spared her from pain, and in doing so, we stopped her from growing up. Because pain, unfair as it may seem, teaches. It shapes character, brings perspective, and she had never known pain. She had everything. Her mother's love, her grandfather's money, the freedom of someone who never had to fight for a thing. Emily refused to give up. She kept saying her daughter would come around, that one day she'd understand everything that had been done for her, that it was just a matter of time. I saw hope in my daughter's eyes, even when she was falling apart inside. And now, looking back, I wonder if that was faith or delusion, because a mother's love sometimes looks a lot like blindness. And Emily, despite everything, still saw her daughter as that little girl with a messy bun and crooked smile. I, on the other hand, began to let go. Not of my granddaughter, but of expectation. I stopped hoping for change. Stopped believing in return. I kept helping because I didn't want Emily to carry everything alone. But quietly, something in me had already shut down. I still loved that girl, but I no longer recognized who she was. And loving someone who's become a stranger is like holding a torn photo. You know who they were, but the image just won't come together anymore. Emily's funeral was the end of that story, but it was also the beginning of another. Because that day I understood there was no use giving speeches or trying to pull her back. Life would have to teach her what love no longer could. And as painful as it was, maybe that was the only way she'd ever realize what she lost. The morning after the funeral, I expected her to come downstairs with puffy eyes, a quiet soul, or at least a trace of grief. But she walked into the kitchen with headphones on, chewing toast like she'd just returned from a weekend getaway. Her dress looked like it came straight from a boutique window. Light makeup, phone in hand. And the most shocking thing was the total absence of weight in her gaze. No shadow, no guilt, no hint of sorrow. I pulled out a chair, took a deep breath, and asked to talk. She rolled her eyes, took out one earbud, and said, "Make it quick, Grandpa. I got plans." I wanted to scream, to shake her until she saw how absurd this was. But I breathed again. I asked how she was feeling, if she'd even considered showing up. And she answered, with a smirk of disdain, "It's over. She's dead. I had tickets to a concert. I wasn't going to miss it for a coffin." It wasn't anger I felt. It was a deep, quiet sadness, the kind that feels ancient, like hope had been buried too. I stared at her for a while. Her face looked so much like her mother's, but her eyes, there was nothing of Emily in them. Those were the eyes of someone who'd never truly known love. Or worse, someone who had, and learned to despise it. And that's when I knew I had to act. For my daughter's memory. For myself. And maybe, one day for her too. I told her, calmly, that things were going to change. That her card was canceled. That the account under Emily's name, which she'd been using like her own, was being shut down. She laughed. Thought I was bluffing. Said I couldn't do that to her. She had plans. Trips booked. Close to buy. I reminded her, none of that was hers. I'd been paying for everything. And she didn't work, didn't take school seriously, didn't contribute a thing. "You always helped me, Grandpa. Why abandon me now?" she asked, with a tone soaked in fake victimhood, like she was suddenly the wounded one in the story. I wasn't abandoning her. I had warned her. For years. Emily did too. But she chose to listen to empty applause from Instagram friends. Chose likes over real conversations. Chose the illusion of fleeting fame over the respect owed to her mother. And now, the bill was due. She went quiet for a moment, then scoffed, grabbed her bag, and slammed the door. Hours later, she sent a message. "You'll regret cutting me off." I read it like a farewell note from someone who still had no idea what they'd lost. She thought it was about money. Thought I was being cruel. What she didn't see was that this cut, this break, might be her only real chance at being saved. Cutting her off, financially, was the only way to reach where it hurt. Not out of revenge, but because words never worked with her. Maybe silence would. Maybe absence would. Maybe the void would. And though it tore me up inside, I knew I had to follow through. Emily never had the strength to do it. And I get it. Mothers rarely do. But I could. I had to. I spent the rest of that day going through papers, calling the bank, transferring balances, closing permissions. It wasn't easy. Every click felt like a betrayal. But at the same time, it was like closing a door that should have been shut years ago. That day, I cried for Emily. But I cried for myself too. For the loss of a daughter. For the loss of a granddaughter. And for the bitter truth that even doing the right thing can feel like a heartbreak. She didn't understand it yet. But life would teach her. And maybe, just maybe, someday she'd look back and realize that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The first push. The first step outside the bubble. And if she ever finds the strength to say thank you, I'll be here, waiting, carrying the weight of doing what was right, even when it hurt like it was wrong. The following Saturday, she went to the mall with two of her friends. I only heard about it later from one of them. They've been buzzing with excitement since morning, chatting about new clothes, makeup, shoes. My granddaughter still thought this was all just a bluff, that her grumpy old grandpa would cave like always. She didn't realize I'd shut every door this time, literally all of them, even the ones I kept cracked open in the back of my heart, hoping she'd come back changed. They walked into a designer store, clothes displayed like artwork, price tags high enough to make any grown adult pause. But not her. She picked what she wanted without glancing at a single tag. Walked to the register smiling, like the world still belonged to her. Handed over her black card with that theatrical flair her friends always called powerful. The cashier swiped it once. Then again. A third time. Nothing. The system declined. "Would you like to try another?" she asked. And that's when it hit her she didn't have another. She tried calling the bank right there, in front of everyone, like she could fix it all with a snap of her fingers. But the answer was clear. All accounts had been blocked. Every one of them linked to her mother's ID. And her mother wasn't here anymore. And the grandfather who'd been the invisible safety net for her lifestyle had stopped being invisible. He'd cut the strings. She walked out of that store with her face burning, heart racing, and a shame no amount of makeup could hide. Her friends laughed. Not right then, of course, but later. You always find out, no matter how well they fake loyalty. The same girls who clapped for every outfit now whispered behind her back, texted each other in secret, started drifting away. Because friendship built on money collapses with credit. And that day was the first time she tasted abandonment. It doesn't hit the tongue, it hits the chest. She came home empty-handed. No bags, no friends, no answers. She tried calling me twice. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because anything I said in that moment would have sounded like a lecture. And I didn't want to lecture anymore. I'd said enough. She needed to hear a different voice now. The voice of reality, of consequence, of silence. And sometimes silence screams louder than any scolding ever could. In the middle of the night, she texted, "This isn't fair. I'm your granddaughter." And I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Because yes, she was my granddaughter. But she was also someone who'd hurt her own mother, thrown away all the love she'd been given, and now believed that a last name was enough to guarantee comfort. It wasn't. It never was. I'd just taken too long to show her that. Over the next week, she tried to unlock the accounts herself. Went to the bank, called the manager, begged for limits, tried to argue she had a right. But the paperwork said otherwise. Everything was in her mother's name. And without my authorization, there was nothing to reclaim. Just emptiness. Just absence. And suddenly, her world, that stage built on likes, poses, and pretense, began to collapse in slow motion. Some friends still offered help. A card, a ride, a bit of cash, but only out of convenience. When she tried staying at one of their homes for a few nights, she realized the invitation had strings, conditions, judging eyes. She tried to keep up the act, but the world doesn't hold up facades for long. And what starts as a mask always ends in ruins. That was her first fall, not the worst one yet, but the one that cracked the surface. Because it wasn't just a car that got declined. It was the illusion that everything would always be within reach, that the world owed her just because she always had. And that Saturday afternoon, walking out of the mall with her head down, for the first time, maybe she started to understand. She didn't regret it yet, but she felt it. And feeling is where everything begins. The house where Emily had lived with her daughter had already begun to show signs of neglect long before she passed. The bills were being paid with the monthly help I sent, a fixed, generous amount that she used to keep things in order. When I cut that off, it was like removing the one pillar holding up a shaky structure. It didn't collapse all at once, but the cracks showed up fast. My granddaughter tried to pretend everything was fine. She still posted mirror selfies, wore leftovers from her days of plenty, replied to comments like nothing had changed. But inside the house, reality was knocking, sometimes literally. First to leave was the housekeeper, who stopped showing up when her pay was late. Then the fridge started going empty. And finally came the warnings: overdue bills, late fees piling up, deadlines closing in. Truth is, the bills had already been stacking up even before the funeral. Emily had been stretching things, juggling payments. I helped, of course, but I didn't know she was already using credit cards to cover the essentials. When I pulled the plug, it only took a few days for reality to come crashing down. The electricity was cut on a stifling Tuesday, and the water, already under threat, ran dry by Wednesday. On Thursday, she came home to find a notice taped to the door: eviction warning. The rent, once debited directly from her mother's account, had been unpaid for 2 months. She didn't know, or didn't care, thought the world would just sort itself out. But it doesn't. Life doesn't wait for you to grow up. And when it hits hard. No power, no water, and about to lose her roof, she started calling friends. Some answered, some didn't. One let her crash on the couch, just for the night. Another offered floor space in a bedroom, but warned her parents couldn't find out. That's when she realized her so-called support network was made of frayed threads. She spent nights bouncing from place to place. Backpack on her shoulders, makeup covering the exhaustion, fake smiles trying to keep up appearances. But no one could sustain a lie for long. Her friends started to drift. The jokes became more pointed. She felt it, In their looks, their silence, their doors that used to be open, now barely cracked. Until they weren't. One night, she tried to return home, but found the locks changed by the landlord, who'd already filed the eviction in court. She sat on the curb with her phone in hand, not knowing where to go. She called a few distant aunts. None picked up. As she tried calling me again, I didn't answer. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I knew she wasn't ready yet. Sometimes you have to hit rock bottom before you find the will to rise. Over the next few days, she started selling what she had. Designer purses, imported perfumes, a tablet. Items she once flaunted, now traded for a meal or a place to sleep. It was humiliating, but necessary, because only those who've gone to bed hungry understand the value of a hot plate. And only those who've lost a home truly grasp what it means to carry a key in your pocket. And in the middle of it all, she started to change. Not overnight, but slowly, quietly, through pain. Because suffering, if it doesn't destroy you, wakes you up. And for the first time, she was starting to wake up. She didn't post anymore, didn't smile for no reason. And maybe, deep down, she began to remember her mother. How she'd seen her sweat, exhausted, smiling through it all, just to keep her safe. And once that memory hits, there's no going back to who you were. She was tired, not the kind of tired a hot shower fixes. This was different, a tiredness that settles in your bones, in your thoughts, in the days that repeat with no meaning. She slept on borrowed mattresses, ate whatever was handed to her, and every harsh word became a reminder of how much she'd lost. Her pride started to wither, slowly, not by choice, but because sometimes pain teaches more than love ever could. One night, an older woman found her sitting in front of a bakery. She had a bag of clothes, her hair tied up in a messy bun, and eyes red from too many sleepless nights. The woman offered her a slice of cake and a cup of coffee. She took it shamefully, and then came the real blow. The woman, with gentleness, said, "You look like someone who once had a lot, and now has nothing. Are you ready to change?" She didn't respond. For the first time, someone saw her fully. No filters, no fluff. They talked for hours, right there on the sidewalk. The woman shared her own story. Rejection, hunger, humiliation. But she survived. "You know what changed everything for me?" she asked. "The day I stopped blaming the world and started looking in the mirror." That line echoed in my granddaughter's head for days. Louder than any sermon, louder than any lecture from me or her mother. Because the truth, when spoken with empathy, doesn't attack. It pierces and transforms. In the days that followed, she started looking for work. Anything. She spent a day at a cafe, got let go, washed cars, poured water at an event. Nothing steady, nothing secure. But in the middle of those small efforts, a new version of her began to take shape. More humble, more observant, quieter, because those who've lost everything learn to hear the world differently. She cried a lot, too, but it wasn't the angry, frustrated kind of crying anymore. It was regret, for her mother, for the words she never said, for the hug she refused, for the looks of contempt. She began writing letters she never sent. One of them was for me. In it, she said she finally understood, that she could now see how deeply she was loved, that she didn't know how to ask for forgiveness, that maybe it was too late, but she wanted to try. She started attending church with the woman who had helped her. She sat in the back pews, listened quietly, didn't know how to pray, but tried, closed her eyes, and asked for direction, for strength, for a chance to begin again. Sometimes she didn't say a word, just sat there, feeling something inside her break, and something else begin to grow, because faith, when born from pain, is like a root breaking through concrete. She began helping the woman with small chores, washing dishes, sweeping the yard, packing meals for donation. She earned a little, but every coin carried a different weight now. It was clean money, earned money, deserved money. And when she got her first payment, 30 reais for 2 days of work, she cried. Out of gratitude, because it wasn't about the amount. It was about what it meant. One day, looking at herself in the church's bathroom mirror, she didn't recognize who she saw. And it wasn't the outside. It was the inside. She wasn't that arrogant, shallow, impatient girl anymore. There were still marks, sure. Scars take time. But there was also a new look in her eyes, a new stillness, a different posture. She was changed. Not perfect, but better. And deep down, she knew it was time. Time to face what she'd left behind. Time to ask for forgiveness, not just with words, but with actions. Time to look into the eyes she'd avoided. Because as painful as it would be, she knew she had to find me. Not to ask for help, but to say that she finally understood. And that was already a beginning. It was a cold afternoon when the doorbell rang. And somehow, I already knew it was her. I can't explain how. Maybe it was the way the wind came through the window that day, like it was carrying something with it. I got up slowly, walked to the door, and there she was. Thinner, tired, but with a look I'd never seen before. Not the look of someone asking, but someone who understands. She didn't speak right away. Stood there in silence for a few seconds, eyes glossy, clutching her worn-out backpack with both hands. Then she said, "Grandpa, I'm here because I've run out of excuses. And I've also run out of pride." Her voice cracked, but it was real. That was enough. I opened the door, not to welcome her back like nothing happened, but to show that there was still space. That forgiveness isn't the same as blind reconciliation. We sat on the porch. The silence settled around us. And slowly, she told me everything. Where she'd been, what she went through, what she learned. She cried when she spoke of her mom. Said she'd trade everything for one more minute with her. That she now understood every no, every tear, every night she saw her mother exhausted and turn away. She asked for forgiveness, not with pretty words, but with the kind of regret that weighs on your whole body. I waited until she finished. Then I took a deep breath and said, "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because the love I have for you is bigger than all this. But love doesn't pay bills. And this time, you'll walk on your own feet." She nodded, didn't beg, didn't try to negotiate, just nodded and wiped her tears. And in that moment, I saw it. Maturity. For the first time, I told her I could refer her for a job. Nothing fancy, but honest. A little neighborhood market where the owner, a friend of mine, was looking for help. She said yes on the spot. Didn't ask about pay, hours, nothing. Just thanked me. And I understood this was it. She didn't want comfort. She wanted a chance. A door. And that I could give. In the days that followed, she started working. Left early, came back late, and sometimes stopped by just to say hi. Didn't ask for anything. Just shared updates. Sometimes brought a sweet roll. Sometimes just a shy smile. And slowly, our bond started to rebuild. Not like before, but as two people learning to truly see each other. One day, months later, she showed up with an envelope. It was her first full paycheck. She handed it to me and said, "I want to pay you back for everything." I smiled, gave the envelope back, and said, "Forgiveness doesn't buy anything. And love was never for sale here." She laughed, then cried, hugged me tight. And in that hug, I knew my daughter, wherever she is now, can finally rest. Today, she lives in a small room behind the house of the woman who took her in. She studies at night, works during the day, and makes simple plans. No luxuries, but she has purpose. And every Saturday, she comes over for lunch. Sometimes she brings flowers. Sometimes just conversation. And every time she looks me in the eyes, I see respect. And more than anything, I see gratitude. The real inheritance.